Okay, so that's 1 minute past the hour, so we'll get started with it. So thank you all for joining us on this wonderful Patch Tuesday that we've got today. I'm James Preston, our Principal Security Consultant over here at ANSecurity, and part of my job is figuring out the problems that our customers, you all have. One of the themes I've seen consistently over about the last couple of years is problems in getting security certificates consistently onto systems and getting those managed in a nice, consistent manner. So that's the core focus of our webinar that we've got going on today. We're going to cover a variety of different topics, including the history of security certificate lifetimes. So as you'll hopefully be aware, these are dropping again in the future. We've also got some benefits to that as well. We'll cover what those benefits are, and that rolls quite nicely into considerations that you will all have as well as to how we actually go and manage those new security certificates, how we go and manage that reduction in lifetime. Now, an interesting topic, we keep seeing consistently organizations allowing traffic from untrusted networks into their servers VLAN, into their infrastructure VLANs, without isolating those systems at all from other systems that might be impacted by a determined high-skilled threat actor. So we're going to have a quick look at how we consider a DMZ network to look in a brief summary there, and rolling into how we can then use the features that are baked into the technology that we're going to present today, baked into the next generation firewalls that you might have already invested in, to go and perform effective inbound decryption for the use of IDS, IPS services, for the use of services which can go and prevent these attacks in the first place. Now we've got the Q&A available and open. I'll come on to questions and answers at the very end of the presentation for it. Please feel free to drop your questions in throughout the course of the presentation though, but we'll get those addressed at the end of our presentation. So getting right into it then, we've got our security certificates. These are the security certificates that we use to go and secure the connections between end users and the services that we publish out to the internet. So we've got an example here looking at some security certificates for a couple of different websites, so the BBC website and the Cloudflare website. And one of the things that we'll note about these two different security certificates is their lifetime, how long they're actually going to exist before they need replacement. Now, the BBC here on the left-hand side, they've got their security certificate set up for about a year there, and Cloudflare, they're renewing their security certificates every 3 months. And that's the state that we see most organizations in at the moment, either replacing something to the order of every 3 months, perhaps every 6 months, up to a full year, of course, as well. And you might already be familiar with tools such as those from DigiCert, such as XCA, such as Let's Encrypt, which you might be using already to go and issue security certificates onto your systems, go and manage things like private keys, go and manage the chaining of security certificates as well. And I think the thing to address in this presentation is that, yes, some of you will already have adopted services such as Let's Encrypt, but the notion of the later parts of this presentation is how we can go and take that adoption and take it to the next level so we can get those enhanced security features being used on the systems that, again, you might already have for us. Now, in the worst case scenario, we might just not be managing our security certificates at all. All too often, in particular with internal systems, we keep seeing customers bumping into these security certificate warning prompts. Now, these warning prompts are indeed a reminder that the connection between your client and the service that you're accessing is indeed not trustworthy, isn't secured to the manner that the browser can guarantee that credentials won't be intercepted and stolen in the process. And indeed, those of you who've already engaged with our threat emulation service will know all too well how easy it is to go and intercept that communication, especially if we can gain physical access into a network, and then go and steal the data, go and steal the usernames and passwords as they go over the wire. And this is where we're again advocating for the implication and the use of security certificates, be it for public-facing systems or for internal systems as well, such as our example here, a VMware host, a vSphere host sitting inside a lab network. So let's have a look at our lifetimes of security certificates so far. So the lifetime security certificates has been reducing over the last couple of years. If we go all the way back to 2012, the Curiosity rover was landing on Mars, and you could get yourself a security certificate issued for about 60 months. We hop forwards all the way into 2015, so 3 years later, the FIFA corruption case. I tried to choose some, events which might be familiar with people. I've got no idea about sports, but here we are talking about FIFA all the same. And in 2015, we dropped that all the way down to 39 months. 2018 rolls in, SpaceX goes and launches a Tesla Roadster into space, and we get some nice views from Earth. During 2018, we dropped the security certificate lifetime to 825 days. And our current state, leaping forwards to 2020, when COVID-19, of course, was taking hold, we further reduced that maximum lifetime of a security certificate to 398 days. The important distinction to make here is this is for security certificates for public-facing systems, systems which people on the internet will be accessing, people that haven't got a security certificate authority that you've issued yourselves. So although, yes, these security certificate lifetimes are reducing significantly for public-facing systems, those organizations who have set up an internal certificate authority, have gone and issued those keys themselves, will find that you can actually continue to issue security certificates for effectively any lifetime that you want, be it 10 years, 20, 30, or even 50 years in some cases. So here we're focusing predominantly on those systems which are being accessed from the internet. So it's not going to stop there. I remember back in October of last year, Google, or the Chromium project in precise, went and published an article about how they were going to continue to reduce security certificate lifetimes, and that Google was actually targeting the reduction of security certificate lifetimes all the way down to 90 days in a very aggressive schedule. They've since backpedaled, no surprise there. And the regulatory bodies, in particular the CAB forum, the CA browser forum, has gone and taken a stance as to what their next steps are going to be. So the current plan is that by March 2026, the security certificate lifetime is going to drop further to 200 days. So we're going to be replacing all our public-facing certificates at least once or twice a year, depending on where those dates fall. Taking that further, March 2027, bringing that down to 100 days, further forwards into 2028, 47 days. And although no further schedule has been set beyond March of 2028, there's already been discussions about reducing the lifetime of security certificates even lower, as far down as 7 days in some situations. So this is something which at the moment is going to happen. So unless something critical happens between the CA and the browser forum, that you can already access there through GitHub and have a look at their proposals, for instance, unless something serious happens there, we're going to see that reduction in security certificate lifetime. And of course, now is the great time for us to go and prepare for that. Now, this goes hand in hand with a little bit of turmoil inside the security certificate industry. So a little bit earlier last year, Google, of course, cut their ties with Entrust. So they were deeming Entrust as not being a trusted security certificate authority anymore, in particular their poor handling of security certificate encryption keys and the likes for it. Now, this caused a fair amount of turmoil for those who were already issuing security certificates through Entrust. They had to very quickly go and find an alternative vendor, an alternative supplier. Looking at some of the names that have joined us on this call today, I can see a lot of people from academia in the UK. Of course, the agreements between JISC, the UK authority when it comes to network connectivity for marvelous world that is academia and research in the UK, that agreement fell apart, and with Entrust they then were looking at alternatives, which still hasn't been fully completed yet. So Sector went and bought Entrust, and that's the situation we're in at the moment when it comes to these organizations having different buyouts, different mergers, and causing some general turmoil when it comes to these security certificate authorities. Now, there are indeed some benefits to the reduction of the security certificate lifetimes. There are indeed some things that we get as IT administrators, as users of these public-facing services, by going and reducing these security certificate lifetimes. Now, our top row here is all a factor of encouragement in the use of automation. So especially getting these certificate lifetimes down as far as 100 days and the likes for it. If we need to go and use automation to go and actually manage these security certificates that we issue onto our systems for it. Now, by encouraging the use of automation, we reduce the likelihood of human error. And all too often, again, I see customers struggling getting security certificate chains formatted correctly, accidentally putting public keys and private keys where they shouldn't be going, in particular, of course, the private keys. And by automating this process, we can remove those elements of human error. We can go and take away the problems that might be introduced through misconfiguration, for instance. Now, the bottom row is more an advantage to the consumer of these services. The first being an increase in the rate of domain verification. So quite often what we find is that the Security Certificate Authority will verify that you are indeed the owner and the operator of that domain between every 90 and perhaps 360 plus days. Now, having such a long time in that security certificate kind of verification process leads opportunities for threat actors to identify domains that have expired, go and take those domains over, get valid security certificates issued to them, and of course then go and impersonate otherwise legitimate services. Now, it also reduces the scope of potential further compromise of systems in the event of the loss or abuse of a private key. So if a threat actor manages to go and compromise that private key, go and steal that private key, which is ultimately securing the connections between the client and the service there, they can effectively decode any of the traffic, decrypt any of the traffic that's gone through that service. And by regularly rotating that private key, by using automation to go and regularly change that private key, in the event of compromise, in the worst case scenario, perhaps the threat actor will only have access to that system for 100 or less days once we start getting down to the final stages of this change on program. And equally so, I'm sure a lot of you have heard the scaremongering that's going around about a post-quantum world where quantum computers come along and break classic cryptography, break all the problems that we introduced to ourselves by using older encryption algorithms. Although we're a long way off from that. We're a long way off from quantum computers really being accessible at scale, in particular to the threat actors that we're likely to encounter. By adopting automation now, by going and implementing these systems now, it allows us to use stronger cipher suites that are indeed resistant to that of a quantum computer, resistant to brute forcing through a quantum computer. Now, there are indeed a whole raft of other good reasons as to why we want to go and implement this shorter lifetime for security certificates. Reduction in the size of certificate revocation lists perhaps is one of those. It's not something that you're necessarily going to feel a tangible benefit in, but is indeed a good thing for us to go and get implemented. So this brings us quite nicely on to that mention there of TLS versions and cipher suites. So two examples, two different websites that I've seen published out recently that we went and helped get the security certificate set up for, actually. And we, of course, made some configuration changes to the one on the right to go and get it set up correctly. But if you head over to sslabs.com and their /SSL test there, you can go and poke in any of the domains that you've got accessed from the public-facing internet and go and see what score your implementation of TLS and cipher suite versions go. And what we typically see is those organizations that have introduced automation, those organizations who have gone and considered the use of strong cipher suites, the cipher suites which are unlikely to be broken through brute force anytime soon, will have those higher grades, will have those A's, will have those A pluses. Whereas some organizations who don't go and consider, well, no one uses TLS 1.0 on their end user devices anymore. And if you do have a device that can only use TLS 1.0, it's probably time to go and replace it anyway. It's probably a device which is no longer receiving security updates. So let's go turn those weaker versions off. Let's go and turn those encryption and cipher suite versions off that people are simply no longer going to be used to ultimately improve the security of our service. Now, we see all too often other websites where the administrators just haven't understood the implications of not configuring these elements correctly, perhaps really using really old cipher suites such as RC4, perhaps going and supporting anonymous cipher suites which just don't provide any real protection whatsoever, or perhaps going and misconfiguring the certificate chains on their systems, which then goes and causes problems for their end users, particularly on macOS devices. macOS devices do a lot of really strong, really significant certificate verification checks. And if you've got an incomplete chain, you'll find that your people on iOS devices, on macOS devices, just can't access your websites. So let's go and introduce automation into the system. Let's go and introduce strong cipher suites, strong TLS versions, and we'll see that our websites will indeed be appropriately protected. So the considerations for you. We've introduced all these problems. We've said, okay, security certificate lifetime is going to drop. It's something we need to go and manage. Yes, we could go and manage it in 2026, but you know what? By that point, you're now trying to go and catch up with everyone. If we get ahead of this problem right now, we know that we're ready all the way out into 2028 and beyond potentially. So first we need to consider, how do we automate? How do we go and implement systems which can automatically replace those security certificates on all the relevant elements of the chain, on the server itself, on any systems that we might be decrypting through and the likes for it? And then equally so, we might encounter some systems that just don't have the ability to offer some form of automation at the moment. And although I wouldn't mind betting that these are, again, predominantly legacy systems which we perhaps don't really want to go and expose to the internet, we will still encounter them. We will still encounter systems that just don't have the ability to perform some form of certificate automation. Building management systems are perhaps a key one here I keep seeing. Organizations that perhaps have a public service where a third party can go and manage their BMS systems without wrapping it up in a nice safe VPN first, but still do publish it out to the internet. Well, let's go and protect those, at least with their security certificates. Inbound inspection. Now, for those organizations who have really gone down the excellent path with us over the last couple of years, you'll see me of banging the drum when it comes to let's go and do inbound decryption on our firewalls. Let's go and enable those features so that on our network firewalls that we've already invested in, we can go and get more value out of them. Now, having those repeated security certificate changes does introduce some problems for those systems which need to do inbound inspection. How do we get that change certificate onto the firewall? That still needs to be either a manual process, or perhaps we need to go and look at some way with PowerShell or another scripting language to go and introduce that. And the solution that we've got at the end of this presentation really handles that in a nice, graceful manner, I think. And of course, we need to actually go and implement these changes. Perhaps you are one of those organizations that's already really mature in this space. Perhaps you've already been using Let's Encrypt on 90% plus of your systems. But also I can see organizations on the list that's joined us today where we know that the maturity level when it comes to having these kind of systems is really very low. Perhaps you've only got one or two systems that you rotate the security certificates on. So right now it's quite perfectly manageable to go and routinely replace those security certificates once a year. But how routine is that going to be? How much disruptive is that going to be to your organizations if you have to do it every 100 days, for instance, and perhaps go and introduce configuration issues along the way? So let's leave security certificates for a minute. We'll come on to the solution to these problems in a little while. But first, let's go and have a look at another problem that we keep seeing inside organizations day in, day out. If we think all the way back to the kind of the late 90s, perhaps the early 2000s, DMZs, everyone had a DMZ. You wouldn't publish systems out to the internet without a DMZ. But all too often, again, with those organizations that have a large public IP address space, so perhaps they've been issued a /24, particularly in academia, where perhaps even a /22 or even as high as a /16 sometimes has been issued out. We see situations where organizations have a web server in the same network as their domain controllers, as a web server in the same network as the SQL database which goes and powers it. And of course, this goes and introduces problems. If that system gets compromised from the internet, from an untrusted connection, perhaps there was a vulnerability in that system, perhaps there was a configuration issue in that system, it's very easy for malware to go and spread inside that network. And of course, the moment that system is compromised, it can go and spread to absolutely anywhere, perhaps go and compromise those domain controllers. And this is a simple matter of allowing inbound connections to an address space, which has both systems which are accessible from the internet in, but also systems that are accessible only from the internal network. A single, almost flat network is what we keep seeing in these situations. And this might, of course, then go and spread to our end user devices as well. So just by going and publishing a WordPress site out to the internet, perhaps there's a vulnerability in that WordPress site, threat actor goes and exploits that vulnerability, goes and realizes that the web server was running as root on that Linux system, or now they're root on one system, they just need to go and find more vulnerabilities inside the same network and start pivoting, start escalating, start gaining extra privileges, all the way until you find that your end user devices, your servers, your file servers, your cloud services have all been ransomwared off the face of the planet. Really bad situations, we don't even have an end user device network. And I can probably see a couple of you in the background there chuckling away. Why would anyone ever design a network like this? The unfortunate reality is we do keep seeing this. We keep bumping into organizations with a big public IP address allocation that have everything bundled together without any segmentation or segregation. So Our real solution to this problem is, well, let's go and control the traffic into our systems which are publicly accessible. Let's go and put them in their own dedicated network, a DMZ network. And equally so, if our servers or our end user devices need to connect to that system, they're going to do that through our central network firewall. We're going to go and write fine-grained firewall policies that say, yes, this end user can access this system. No, it can't access this system. If you want to be able to go and manage that system, you need to be this user on this device at this time to go and access that in the first place. We can go and put really good technical controls in place to prevent any malware, any ransomware, any exploit of a DMZ system from spreading just by putting those systems in their own dedicated networks. So the ultimate solution that we have here is our design that we're proposing as a nice, easy way to, one, go and fix the problem of security certificate renewal, two, go and fix the problem of consistently seeing these very flat networks where servers, where domain controllers, where end user devices are still in the same network as systems which allow connections from untrusted networks, and go and implement what we call a Web Application Firewall, or a WAF, you might hear them referred to on occasion. So we have a series of different traffic flows going on here. Our first traffic flow is on the outside of our connections. We have a layer 4 network firewall, which is filtering connections into the services that we're publishing out to the internet based on nice, simple source IP address and port. So we're simply saying from this source address range, you can go and access our system. From this port, so 80 and 443 being the common ones, of course, you can go and access this system. Now, next, our Web Application Firewall, which is performing automated security certificate renewal, and that can be set to whatever time period the certificate authority accepts. If you want to go and replace your security certificates every 30 days, great. If you want to do it every 7 days right now, well, there are some additional considerations for doing that. But again, you could go and do that today with the systems that we're proposing here. Now, that Web Application Firewall presents a public-facing security certificate to the end user. And that end user could be those users inside your network, particularly when going and protecting sensitive systems, going and securing access to those VMware management consoles is the one that I keep seeing, whilst then decrypting and re-encrypting the traffic that heads towards the web server. So we've gone and terminated that session. We've presented a nice public side security certificate to our end users. We've said, this is the security certificate that you're going to see. It's valid for just 30 days. It's valid for just 90 days, whatever we've gone and configured it for. And that's the certificate that you're going to see. So next up, we then go and configure a long life security certificate on both the network firewall, which is going to go and perform traffic decryption, and also on the web server itself. And as I was mentioning earlier, these long life security certificates, when they're issued by an internal certificate authority, they could be valid for years, decades even. And what I typically advertise there is go and configure those security certificates for the expected lifetime of that service. So if you've got a VMware stack, you expect it to be good for the next 5 years, go and configure that security certificate lifetime for 7 years. And that way, if you just need to squeeze a little bit more out of it, you've got 2 years of breathing room there. So our layer 7 network firewall is then going to decrypt the traffic with that private side certificate, that certificate which doesn't routinely change. It performs traffic intrusion detection and prevention services, so it can go and detect SQL injection attacks. It can go and detect the next vulnerability that happens inside Avanti systems, because it's always Avanti systems that make it onto the internet at the moment, or go and protect any other web servers that you might be publishing. And of course, once it's decrypted that traffic, once it's inspected that traffic, it re-encrypts it and passes it back to the web server, which of course has that private side certificate, that long life security certificate. You might already be thinking, James, what does this do to latency? What does this do to the service experience? And based on the measurements that we've done already, barely any. Most of the time, this is accelerated through the processors inside the hardware. This is accelerated through the systems that we can go and invest in to make this happen. So going on from there, let's have a closer look at these public side and private side security certificates. So I set up this webinar. I set up the presentation for this about a couple of weeks ago. So we can see the lifetime of the security certificate there for our public security certificate is short-lived, just 7 days. So every 7 days, that security certificate gets refreshed, that gets reissued to the machine, and we're good to go. And although that security certificate is, valid for 7 days, we might set the refresh interval to something along the lines of 3 or 4 days. Although I wouldn't necessarily always recommend going all the way down to 7 days, it's a good example. 30 days, 90 days, those are the good places to be aiming for at the moment. Now, this certificate could be issued by a public security certificate authority like Let's Encrypt. And I know a lot of you are already using Let's Encrypt in your systems. That's a really good practice, really good way to go and do it. Now, the private key for that security certificate is stored on the Web Application Firewall. It doesn't leave the Web Application Firewall. It doesn't need to go to the server. It doesn't need to go to the network firewall. It just stays there on the WAF. And then our private side security certificate, I've taken it to the max here and issued a 20-year long life security certificate. It's been issued by an internal certificate authority. And for those organizations who don't already have an internal CA set up, we can help with that as part of our delivery of this service. And that private key is stored on both a network firewall and also the web server. So 2 locations where the decryption is happening for that private side security certificate. So let's continue on from there. So here we have an example configuration for how this might look for an internal facing system running PRTG network monitor, for instance. But this could apply to pretty much any system that you might have, be it publicly accessible, be it remotely accessible, be it accessible from your VPN, or perhaps just from your internal network. And with a very nice simple check of the tick boxes there, we've enabled TLS versions 1.2 and 1.3, commonly regarded as the strong versions of TLS. I see some organizations even cutting off TLS 1.2 now, simply because there are so many devices now out there that support 1.3. And we've gone and again selected with a nice simple user interface, something that we can go and use a best practice profile for, to go and assign those cipher suites. Only use the strong cipher suites that are currently available. And equally so, as the post-quantum cipher suites become more broadly adopted, we're seeing the vendors go and adopt those inside their products as well. You might have heard of the Kyber cipher suite, for instance. We're seeing that being adopted. So next after that, we've kind of got our configuration set up. Well, do we actually need to do this network security thing? Do we need to go and do this inbound decryption? Do we need to go and do this inspection of the traffic as it comes to our systems that we publish internally or publicly? Well, yes, we really do. So here we have an example from last year's Verizon Data Breach Investigations report. The 2 main ways that threat actors go and gain initial access into the systems is through the abuse of credentials or through the use of phishing. Our third key way that threat actors then go and compromise networks, go and gain initial access to then move laterally, go and exploit systems on the inside, is by exploiting vulnerabilities. All too often we see this in systems which we would typically want to go and publish to the internet. VPN systems, perhaps systems which allow bulk file transfer, such as the MoveIt vulnerabilities that were being so heavily exploited over the last couple of years. And of course, the moment those threat actors have gained access to those systems, they move laterally, they spread ransomware, they steal data, they do all the normal things that threat actors might do. And equally so, if we look at the Centre for Internet Security as another authoritative body in this space, we can look at their CIS controls, a series of practical controls which you can implement, which those organizations who have had one of our security reviews will be very intimately familiar with now. There are 3, perhaps a couple more controls here, which are directly addressed by doing this inbound inspection on the firewall, by doing this checking of the traffic. First, by doing that inspection, you can maintain a network level anti-malware service. So before the malware even makes it to that system, we can see, is there something traveling through the network that looks malicious in nature? If so, prevent it from reaching the system in the first place. Control number 10.1 there, deploy and maintain anti-malware software. Most organizations think about doing this at the endpoint, at the server level. Well, here we can do it at the network level before that even reaches the service to actually be compromised in the first place. And beyond that, equally so for implementations groups 2 and 3, deploy network intrusion detection solutions. This is actually going to detect the vulnerabilities. And although there it's recommended for just group number 3, so those organizations that have got a really kind of mature cybersecurity program, we see it being something that's really nice and trivial to enable for all organizations if they've got an appropriate network firewall, and do network intrusion prevention. Go and detect malicious traffic, go and detect malicious patterns, go and detect SQL injection attacks. Do that at the network level, and it takes some of the load off the service itself. It takes some of the concerns that we might have about protecting that service. So does it work? Yes, it really does. Here we're looking at the MITRE attack matrix. So these are the real known ways that threat actors have been seen gaining access into networks, moving laterally, pivoting, escalating, gaining access to systems which they really shouldn't have access to. And here we can see the MITRE organization, a really popular research organization based out in the United States, saying, please do SSL TLS inspection, look for malicious payloads, prevent that application traffic from reaching the service in the first place, cut it off at the network level. Going on from there then, our solution. So I've got a nice little example demonstration for it, and it started out with this chat inside our Teams channel at work. Dave being my boss, don't worry if you see me downloading web shells again. Every now and again, I've got to go and make one of these presentations, of course, and I enjoy doing them. So I want to go and find some good web shells to go and present to you. A nice malicious way of injecting some code into a web server so that you can then gain access to it from the internet by accessing a specific website. So here we have the network firewall, which has performed inbound decryption into that service, detecting the use of the muddy water web shell. Here, by going into that PRTG service, there's the ability to add what's known as maps. And this is a visual way of representing the status of your network. And here I went to the Add Map To page, and I attempted to upload this web shell to it to see if I could then go and access that web shell. But because I was performing network traffic inspection, because I was performing that decryption, because I was using the IDS IPS functions that are built into the firewall, which we have already, we can see that action of reset both being listed there. The firewall detected it, the firewall prevented it. It told both the client and server, stop this connection now, there's something malicious going on. And we can see that even in higher level classifications of threats. Our first one here, web shell, was a simple medium vulnerability, nice and easy, trivial to detect. Here we've got some critical vulnerabilities being detected as well. It's an attempted SQL injection attempt, attempted exploit of a remote code execution vulnerability in Bash here as well, all published through the web service that we're trying to compromise here. And what we typically see organizations do is if they see a threat actor trying to probe their systems for these kinds of vulnerabilities, is they go and add their source address onto a deny list for the next 7 days, the next month. That organization is then protected by that threat actor attempting to scan or attempting to exploit from that same source address again. And all too often, again, when we look at the customers who have already configured these kinds of systems, we see hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands of IP addresses making it onto those lists. Threat actors who have been seen trying to exploit something which is rated high, which is rated critical, perhaps even rated medium, and saying, no, you no longer get the privilege of seeing our network at all. You have to go and spin up another system in DigitalOcean to compromise us and try. You have to go and spin up another AWS instance. And eventually the threat actors just get bored and go and find a new target, find someone easier. Now, the examples I've been using here is from a Palo Alto Networks firewall, but the same practices apply to almost any decent next generation firewall vendor out there. So here we've got a list of new vulnerability signatures. Those of you who've got Paolo's might be familiar with an email which comes out every few days and says, here are the new things we've got signatures for. Here are the new vulnerabilities that we've detected people exploiting. And in some situations, those will be brand new vulnerabilities dating, 2024, 2025. In some situations, though, in particular for those organizations that have got systems that just can't be patched, can't be updated for insert, I'm sure a very good reason here, we see Palo Alto Networks and the other security vendors going and pushing detections for vulnerabilities dating all the way back to 2020, 2021, 2010, even in these lists that we can see here from the CVE numbers. So some alternatives. The solution that I'm proposing here is a web application firewall. There are loads of different ways of doing effectively the same thing, depending on your choice of technology, depending on where you host your systems. And what we see is a lot of the cloud security service providers, so your AWSs and the likes, your Azures and your GCPs, will have some form of automated certificate renewal. What we quite often see, though, is they don't have the features built straight in without additional product activation to actually go and do these security service elements. So yes, they can rotate your security certificate every 30 days, but without the additional configuration, no, they're not protecting your service from SQL injection attacks. Now, Web Application Firewall as a service, because everything is as a service these days, is another really good option there. And again, what we see is most of the vendors in this space have both a physical appliance offering, a virtual appliance offering, and also a cloud offering. The advantage there, of course, is you don't have to have a new piece of equipment to go and maintain, go and support. It's just hosted in a cloud service. But of course, there you are then also taking your private keys and handing them over to a cloud service provider. And again, looking down the list of people that have joined us here, perhaps some of the organizations have security requirements which require them to know where their private keys are, and they much prefer to have them either on premise or inside their own virtual stack. There are, of course, other ways of protecting those keys. The roll your own alternative, I've got a really good example here. IIS proxy, for instance, is a nice easy way of doing it. Nginx proxies, but I've got a really good example as to why that might not necessarily always be the best interest. And of course, that then brings us down to the hardware and virtual offerings as well from those vendors, from those web application firewall vendors. So when it comes to rolling your own, so here we have the CIS benchmark for securing the Nginx web proxy, 155-page guide on how to take that web server and secure it. Alternatively, perhaps you might want to go and roll this instead with the Apache HTTP server, a 257-page guide on how you can go and secure that system in the first place. The alternative, of course, to rolling your own, running your own systems for these things, doing these proxy activities yourself, is a single, easy to use, easy to manage appliance, which just with a couple of tick boxes can go and have a really strong, really secure setup. So yes, it's an option. Yes, we see it out there, in particular with the IIS proxy, and particularly with Nginx, but please consider the security of those systems yourselves as well. How often does they get patched? How often do you go and do a secure configuration practice? How often do we pick up things like the CIS guides and apply it to our systems? So there's more. There truly is more. By implementing a web application firewall, there are so many things that we can do with that appliance, which perhaps you don't already have the features to do already. The first one being health checks. So perhaps if you've got multiple systems, perhaps if you've got multiple web servers, and one of those servers is down for maintenance, the web application firewall can go and probe that system, see it's offline, take it out of the load balancer pool, and that way when your users go and visit that system, instead of them getting a server which is potentially offline, potentially not reserving requests and getting an error message, instead they're going to get one of the different servers in your pool. One of the other features I really like there is the ability to go and pop a custom response page if that service is offline. So perhaps you do only have a single web server, but you're publishing it through this system. Well, perhaps it's offline, perhaps it's not responding at all, perhaps we can't even get a 404 error message out of it. Again, because that web server, because that web application firewall is probing the web server, it can say, okay, that's offline, that's not healthy. Let's redirect the request to another system, which just displays we're down for maintenance at the moment. One of the fun elements is when it comes to those HTTP request methods, a lot of websites, if they don't require any upload of user data, just requires the GET method to be functional. And this is where the client at the other end downloads data. One of the really handy ways of protecting that web application is then saying anyone that tries to do a post, anyone that tries to do a put, anyone that tries to do something which has the ability to upload data, perhaps in the exploit of a vulnerability, we're going to cut it off. We're going to say, no, you can't do that. Yes, you can do it for this URL where we've got a form submission page, but everything else is going to be rejected. This is one of those great times when we see web application penetration testers come along and say, James, I can't find a way to go and compromise this system. Can we start turning off the security features so I can at least give it a go? And I say, no problem. Please make sure that's recorded in your report. Let's go and turn off some features so you can see what you might be able to do if we had access to a novel attack method. And that goes further from there. IPv6 support is supported for those organizations that need it. Perhaps you might have some web servers going responding to some specific pages, and you want some web servers responding to other specific web pages. Perhaps you've got some really beefy systems that need to do some really complex processing. Well, let's use content routing to go and pass it over to those systems, whilst the front end of our website is handled by lower suitability web servers for it. If you don't already have a network firewall with IDS IPS functions built in, well, we can do that with a web application firewall at the appropriate licensing level as well. And equally so, this is a really handy way of implementing a zero trust network stance by going and restricting who can get to what systems based on their identity, based on the health of the device, based on various different metrics. And this might even include doing pre-authentication, where you have a web service that doesn't have the native ability to go and implement multi-factor authentication. But by having the Web Application Firewall in the way, we can say if anyone tries to access this URL, redirect them to Entra, get them to go through MFA, redirect them to Okta or Duo or Ping or any of the other MFA service providers and get them to go and secure that service. Now, equally so, I've talked a lot about web applications here, so websites and APIs and the likes for it, but these web application firewalls are also good for other services as well. Perhaps you've got remote desktop session hosts that you need to load balance. A WAF is a handy way of doing that and implementing that as well. So before we roll on to questions and answers, the ANSecurity offering in this space. So looking across our customer base, knowing what you've already got out there, knowing the technologies that you've already invested in, we've packaged up a solution which uses what you have already to its very best of its advantage, while still implementing the key factors of regular security certificate renewal, a DMZ network if you don't have one already, and also the content inspection elements as well. So being able to go and detect at the network level the introduction of malware into your systems, go and introduce the detection of SQL injection attacks into your systems as well. Now that can be bundled up, of course, with an appropriate web application firewall. The demonstrations that I provided here today are with Kemp. So Progress Kemp, you might already be familiar with them, but we have other offerings in this space as well to go and tailor it to whatever your specific needs are. If you're heavy into cloud services, let's look at the cloud offerings. If you're heavy into on-premise services and you don't want to have your private keys going and leaving the network, being potentially vulnerable to threat actors who compromise cloud systems, fantastic. Let's look at hardware appliance with a hardware security module built in for it. Now that, of course, comes along with the professional services to go and deploy this system from end to end. So identifying what you actually need to go and protect. Let's get that security certificate renewal in place, get that DMZ network in place. Let's set up the long life security certificates and the CA authority internally if needed for it. And let's get that delivered to you as a package of work. And of course, for those organizations that don't have the internal resource to go and maintain the new systems that we're introducing here, we can go and offer that through our services as well for it. So that's our main offering. That's the end of the major content for this presentation. I'm gonna have a look at the Q&A now. I see a couple of bits of issued there already for it. All good elements for it. So we've got a question here. If we run an internal certificate authority and can issue certs for as long as you like, are we likely to see problems with browsers accepting these certificates going forwards? The simple answer there is a no. The long answer there is we have control over those browsers. There are group policies. There are policies that we can apply to our browsers to say how long these certificates are going to be valid for. So yes, we can go and address that with the systems that we've got built in. And I've issued security certificates as long as 50 years and browsers are perfectly happy for them when we use internal CAs, and we don't see that changing anytime soon. I hope that's answered your question there. If anyone has got any further questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A. Otherwise, of course, if this sounds like something that you'd like to get implemented, if this sounds like something which you would like to use in your organizations, please get in touch with your account manager and we can set up a call to discuss your requirements. That's all from me now. I'll hang around for a couple of minutes just in case there are any further Q&As, but otherwise I'll leave you to the rest of your Patch Tuesday. Thank you all.